serologic tests, which are measuring the amount of antibodies in an individual. And some of these are undergoing different forms of validation, which is very important. This means that each of the tests that are developed are assessed and evaluated for how well they work. And there you use a known quantity of sera, of biological material, to look and see how well the tests perform. Do they actually measure what they're supposed to measure? And that's important. We are working with a number of labs and also FIND to help do validation of molecular tests as well as serologic tests. And as those validation results come available, then we will have more and more confidence in each of these tests that are out there. There are more than 90 countries that are currently conducting seroepidemiologic studies. We've mentioned that previously. And this is an important part of understanding the extent of infection in a population, in a country, and across the world.
And on the issue of the clinical syndromes associated with COVID-19, I think this is an important issue, because I think we've very often seen with new emerging diseases that they don't always have just one target organ. They tend to cause a much more disseminated disease. They may affect multiple organs. And it is sometimes only over time, many, many generations of transmission, sometimes decades, sometimes hundreds of years, where some diseases establish what looks like a preferred organ, or it becomes an endemic disease with one organ that's affected more than any other organ in the body. And we tend to often call those diseases after the organ they affect. We often call the hepatitis viruses because they cause hepatitis, inflammation of the liver. But there are many different types of virus that cause that same problem. But however, there are diseases like measles, and we often think of measles as a disease, a fever with a rash, a mild self-limiting illness in children. I can tell you that measles in an unvaccinated child who's undernourished and living in a refugee camp is a serious disease that can affect their lungs, their eyes, their brain. It can cause so many different organs to fail. It's quite frightening. So I think when we look at COVID-19, we need to see that as a disease that obviously is a respiratory disease. It's spread by a respiratory route. It causes a respiratory syndrome. It is clear that in a proportion of patients, it is causing a broader inflammatory response, either within the vascular, or that's the blood-carrying system, or in other parts of the body. We've also seen reports of encephalitis, or swelling or inflammation of the brain. We've seen other reports of other effects of the disease. And that's why it's so important, as Maria has said previously, that we continue to collect clinical data from across the world on all of these different impacts of the virus. But it's still primarily causing a respiratory syndrome, and you see that, unfortunately and tragically, repeated day after day in intensive care units around the world, patients struggling to breathe with their oxygen levels falling and having demonstrable damage by CAT scan and X-ray to their lung tissue. That is a major part of the syndrome. But clearly, the vascular effects, or the effects on the blood-carrying system or the cardiovascular system, are there, they're real, and they need to be studied further.
Thank you. Next question is from David Andelman from CNN. David, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.